Welcome to another value-packed episode of the Customers Who Click podcast. Today, we're talking about a super important topic for any business, and that is positioning. Every year, thousands of businesses go bust because they don't understand their audience, they don't fully understand the value of their product or service, and they don't explain it in a way that actually aligns with their customers' needs. So they can't put themselves in front of their customers, and they go bust. Now, just because you're not necessarily about to go bust, or you might even be doing hundreds of thousands or millions every month in revenue, but you can always do better. And a really key way of helping you do this is establishing your position in the market and really understanding your customers. So today I've got Peter Whent with me to explain just how you can do that. Let's hear from him now. Hi, Peter. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, what you do and why you do it?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. What I do is I help startups, typically tech startups, to craft a proposition that will help people to, will make people listen and take action. And I do it for a couple of reasons. I do it from a purpose perspective. I do it because I spent my life in early stage businesses. I've set up and built a few businesses myself. So the last 25 years I've been in startups. And I feel a genuine sense of affinity and connection to that community. And I remember how grateful and beneficial it was when I first started to have help from people who'd been there and done it. And so I do feel a little bit of giving back to the community. And I also do it because it's what I see startups, from my experience, what I see startups get wrong most often, and it's potentially the most damaging aspect of the early stage of their lives.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've been in startups myself. And I've seen that happen. You know, there is a product. They know what that product does, but there's a bit of a lack of kind of messaging and that positioning to actually really help them sell it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's a normal day look like for you?
That's an interesting question. Actually, it looks very different now than it did 3 or 4 months ago. So the way I used to deliver what I do is through a one-day workshop, and so. Up until March, I spent most days somewhere, either on a train or driving to a company somewhere to deliver my workshop. But obviously that stopped. It's now a completely online course. So my day is, from a personal perspective, I'm a bit of an early riser. I like to get up quite early, so I'm probably out of my bed at something like 5:30, and I probably spend a little bit of time, if I'm honest. I'd love to say that I get up and I meditate and all that good stuff, but I don't. The first half an hour of my day, I'll faff and do something I want to do. I might spend some time on a conversation on Twitter or something. But I value those first couple of hours of the day when I'm on my own, the phone's not ringing, there's nobody about. And the rest of the time, I do now a lot of coaching online over Zoom to supplement my course. And so I do that most days. I'm coaching somebody, and if I'm not doing that, then I'm building content, building contacts, that sort of thing. So I work from home, and a very different looking day than it was 3 months ago. It's changed completely.
Yeah, I was hoping by the middle of July that wouldn't be something that gets mentioned on the podcast anymore, but it's been pretty much every episode.
I think it's interesting. I think there is now a new convention. If you're British, you have to start your conversation with 5 minutes of coronavirus. I think it's taken the place of the weather.
Yeah, the weather doesn't come up so much.
No. I think we'll be talking about it for a while. I mean, that's a different conversation, but it's not gone away or going away.
Yeah, but I'm a little bit similar. I'm not as earlier riser, but I don't do the whole meditation and all that stuff. I have my own little routine in the morning. I like it. It keeps me happy. It's it gets me prepared for kind of 8:30, 9 o'clock when I start.
And actually, what's interesting is that I didn't used to get up at 5:30 before lockdown. So there's a couple of things I do. One is I get up early and do a bit of work, and then I go out for a run. And I don't want to sound worthy, but I go out for a run at about 8 o'clock, 2 or 3 times a week. And I didn't used to do that either. And I could have done. I've worked from home for the last, for years. So there's no reason why I shouldn't have done that pre-lockdown. But something about, I think when lockdown started, I think like most people, our anxiety levels went up a little bit, and so those two things I found that were good coping mechanisms for me. Getting up early, getting some work done, going out for a run just set me up for the day nicely.
Yeah, it's what you need, isn't it? Especially if you're locked inside all day. So tell us a bit more about what you do. Tell us about kind of positioning and how the importance of that to a brand.
So I think you hit the nail on the head. What I regularly see genius products that are so clever they make your eyes water, but the people who built them, who are typically technicians, don't know how to go about communicating them to their market in a way that's compelling or that resonates, or that people even understand sometimes. And so quite often what I'm doing is taking the great ideas and what those great ideas can do and almost acting like a translator and turn them into a language that resonates with people. So often it's not about any sort of magic dust. It's just about ordering people's thoughts. And there's a way to tell people about a product that will engage them, and there's a way to tell people about a product which will guarantee they'll just scroll to the next one in 5 seconds. And so quite often it's just taking what's already there and helping people to understand how to do that. And there's a framework I use. And I think it's how you position yourself and how you articulate your proposition, I think it's survival stuff. If you don't do it properly, you could have the best product in the world, and it won't go anywhere. But sometimes you can take bad products and make a lot of them by writing a proposition that really works. So a great example, it's not in the tech world, but LinkedIn is full of life coaches. I mean, I did a count on them, and I did an article about them a while ago. There was something like 80,000 in the UK, and there are some brilliant ones who spent their lives qualifying and learning and improving, and they've got 50 years of experience, but they've got no business because they don't know how to go about presenting themselves. And then there are people who have done a weekend online course in NLP and have got a certificate they printed off, who are brilliant marketeers and have got a waiting list. And that tells you how important the way you communicate your product or service to the market is. So it's absolutely critical that if it's going to get beyond just the development workshop and to the market, you need to know how to position it and know how to articulate the proposition.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hopefully I'm not about to spoil what you're going to tell us later, but there was in one of the recent episodes about copywriting, we talked about the kind of asking, so what? So, a company will say, well, this is our service or our product. You say, well, so what? It helps you do this. Okay, so what? And then you keep asking that question to actually really get to the point of how does this product actually help someone? And what is the point of it?
Yeah, no, that's exactly. So that will get you to the what problem are you really solving?
Yeah. So what are the first things you do when you're starting with a new client or a new project?
Well, actually, interesting with talking about the problem. The first thing I would do with any client would be partly for my benefit, but also partly for their benefit, is have a discussion about what problem are you actually solving, because you quite often you find people. I've seen a few examples of it where they have got great ideas, but there's probably not an urgent need for that idea. So that you can't deny how clever what they're trying to do is, but what you can deny is how much demand there is for it. So you end up with a solution looking for a problem. So the first conversation we have is, what problem are you solving? And the other thing I'll do always at the beginning of a process with a new client is to get them to tell me what they think their proposition is right now, almost like a benchmark. So it gives me a little bit of a feel as to where they are in the process, but also it's quite useful to look back on it afterwards to see how far they've come.
It just made me think, actually, have you ever seen Silicon Valley, the TV show?
I haven't, no.
No, it's really good. It's a comedy TV series, but it kind of takes all those stereotypes from Silicon Valley and gets pretty much every single one in an episode. And one of them is about that kind of, you've got a great idea, but does it actually solve a problem? Do people actually need this?
Yeah.
And the way people describe them, their products and services, they describe the problem they're solving and stuff. But then someone goes, well, that's just a calculator, or that's just Notepad or something. And they don't quite realize that actually the problem is solved. They've put a slight spin on it, but there's no actual need for the product.
Yes, you're right. I saw an exchange on LinkedIn probably about 6 months ago about somebody who had been involved, and I think it might have been IBM, who had built what they described as a private blockchain for some company to be able to track, I think it was food, from where it was made to the supermarket shelf. And somebody said, well, the whole point of blockchain is it's public. If you're building this thing, you're calling it a private blockchain, isn't that just a database? And there was no answer, because exactly that. It was all the spin and all the terminology, but actually what they produced for these guys was a database, a private database.
yeah, just kind of, I don't know if actually just using buzzwords to kind of sell it, or whether, but I think people just get overexcited about these new things and they think, how can we apply this? And they look back at other problems and they go, yeah, okay, this would work perfectly to solve this problem. And yeah, like you said, there's just no need for it. It's that problem is perfectly solved by something else. So what are there any kind of misconceptions when it comes to brand positioning?
Well, unfortunately, yes, because I think if there weren't, I wouldn't be in business. I think the biggest misconception is that the purpose of your proposition is to tell your customer all about you and your product. And actually, the polar opposite. I mean, clearly, you've got to tell them what you do at some point, but if you go and look at, you choose 10 websites at random and go and look at them, I would guess that 9 and maybe even 10 of them they'll be telling you, the headline on the homepage will be telling you all about them. We're a very highly qualified firm of lawyers. We specialize in this. We've got offices here. We've won these awards. And that's just a turn off for people. I mean, so one of the things that we established quite early on whether it's a workshop or an online course, is there's a very uncomfortable principle that you have to get comfortable with if you're going to write a good proposition. And that principle is that nobody cares about you.
Yeah.
And once you've got your head around that, and that's not meant to be insulting, it's just that we go around, we care about ourselves. So one of the questions I ask early on is, when was the last time you woke up first thing in the morning and the first question you thought of was, I hope my next door neighbour had a good night's sleep last night? And you don't. The first thing you think of is, whatever it is, I've got to make sure I get the car in for a service today, or I've got to catch the early train to work. So I've got, you think about you and yourself, and we wander around all day with a conversation in our head that's all about us. And your prospects are exactly the same. They wander around all day worrying all about them. They don't care about you. And so if you want to engage them, you've got to engage them by joining in their conversation, not saying, this is me, this is what I am, this is what I've got, these are my awards, because that just turns them off, because that's not part of their conversation.
Yeah, I think you do see that with SaaS a lot, don't you? Lots and lots of awards and appeared in and things like that. And I know it kind of adds a little bit of social proof. If you've been featured on certain websites, if you're featured on the BBC, that's a pretty good spot to get. And I do like TechCrunch, but almost every SaaS company that's at least fairly established seems to have featured on TechCrunch.
Yeah, I think they tend to be diluted. I think there is. Yeah. So I don't misunderstand me. There is definitely a place for social proof in a proposition. It's a pretty powerful mental buying trigger. We do what other people do, but you just got to get these things in the right order. So what these websites do is they open up with their social proof, and the first thing they say to you is, this is us, we've been on TechCrunch, this is how great we are, these are our awards. And that's not, you can't start like that. You need to engage somebody before you can tell them about yourself. And so really, I suppose we're talking about the opening part of a proposition, which is the most important part, which is the part where you need to engage somebody and draw them in to want to listen. And you can't do that by telling them about you. Yeah.
It's always that headline, that value proposition headline, isn't it? Use this tool to save you 15 hours a week or something like that. That's the bit that makes people think, oh yeah, that'd be like 15 hours, huge amount of time. That's like 2 working days. So, that's a proposition that's likely to get people at least exploring the page a bit more.
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways you can do it, and it almost doesn't matter, but it's just it's the difference between someone looking at the first 2 or 3 lines of your proposition and going, wow, that's interesting, or wow, that's me, as opposed to saying, yawning and saying, I've read all this before, this is the same as everybody else's. So, and there's lots of ways you can do it, but it's got to be, I guess the one golden rule is that part of the proposition can't talk about you at all.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think a lot of these, again with SaaS, a lot of these landing pages or home pages, whatever, tend to have that big kind of, hopefully a value proposition headline. And then once you start scrolling, it kind of gets into those features.
Yeah.
And those features are a bit meaningless if the value proposition's not there.
Yeah.
You don't care about the different, the different functionalities of the tool if you don't actually know the benefit that that's going to provide you. And I think, that's where a lot of companies get it wrong. If that headline is not there and not right, you're going to struggle to get people to scroll. And if you do get people scrolling, there's generally no more value proposition below, really.
I think I think you're right. The opening part of a proposition has got one job, which is to make you read on. So sometimes you see people do some things which are completely off-piste, just to grab your attention and make you read on. And we've got an attention span of something like 8 seconds, and that's if we invest every ounce of our attention span in what we're looking at. But actually, it's realistically probably more like 2 or 3 seconds. We make a decision on something in 2 or 3 seconds. So if you think about, when you're scrolling down through maybe LinkedIn posts or Facebook posts, you might read the first sentence and then that's not being scrolled past. You've given it a second. So you have to make that, if you're even going to get people to scroll down and see what's below in the feature, you've got to grab their attention in the first few seconds. It's the same with any copy, really, but a proposition especially, because it's important to you that they read it. Yeah,
definitely. I think you do see that less in like e-commerce as well. At least with SaaS, they a lot of companies will try to explain the benefit of what their service provides you. But on a lot of e-commerce sites, you kind of land on that website and it's just, here are our products.
Yeah.
And there's very little differentiation. There'll be groups of brands that fit different styles. And occasionally you'll get one that says, we're very environmentally friendly. We donate to charities. We do this work, this work, this work. And they reinforce that throughout the site. And that does, that builds up that brand and that identity and gets people aligned with it. And then you've got those other sites which just say, here are some t-shirts and dresses and shorts and things.
And I suppose with e-commerce, so I don't do any work in e-commerce or very much work with consumer stuff, but it's an e-commerce site, you're a destination site. And so you would guess that people are there because they've chosen to come there, as opposed to B2B sites where you'll probably do a search and you might scroll through a few people in the search and you're trying to capture their attention. I guess that there's an extent to which somebody coming to an e-commerce site is already made some kind of decision they want to buy something. So the question is, where are they going to buy it?
Yeah, but I think there is a lot of browsing, and there's a lot of, obviously, Facebook ads. Facebook ads are more kind of impulse, trying to drive that impulse purchase, or at least that impulse browse.
Yeah.
And you've really got to try and capture people. And I think if you generally differentiate products at least a bit, unless you're kind of just a reseller site. But I still think there needs to be some sort of, I guess maybe it comes down to a bit more just brand identity and things. And there's little bits which capture people's attention a bit more, as opposed to kind of positioning, I suppose.
No, you're right. I think also the work I do is with startups where you're starting from no brand recognition. So you're really starting from zero. The rules change a bit when you're a bigger company. So if I go onto Apple's website, and there's all kinds of things happening in my head that don't happen on a startup's website. I know who they are. I trust them. I like them. I know what they stand for. I know what their products are. I know what the price point's likely to be. So I think that it depends, I suppose, as an e-commerce site, it depends where you sit on that continuum of no one's heard of you to everyone's heard of you.
Yeah, and I think there's a few. Honestly, I think design just comes into it a lot with e-commerce. If you've got a nicely designed website, I think that's really powerful for you if your brand's not too well known.
Yeah,
if you can get someone to land on the website and it's clean, it's easy to use. I don't think people care so much about your brand as long as as if it looks like a professional website, really.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose, I buy stuff from people I've never heard of in my life, but I buy it on an Amazon marketplace, and so I'm ascribing some trust to them because they're they're part of Amazon. So,
you're trusting Amazon.
Exactly. Yeah.
Aren't you? You're trusting that Amazon has vetted these people and they're and know what they're doing with that. And actually, I've just realised, despite saying that design makes a big difference, the website that I've bought sunglasses from a couple of times is one of the worst and most difficult to use websites that I've experienced for a while. But they're a genuine kind of a sunglass brand reseller site, and they're cheaper, and they do have a lot of information as well. They do a lot on their sizing and things like that to help you kind of pick. It's just the searching through their website is a bit of a nightmare, but I put up with it. So yeah, just conflicted.
It's interesting. I suppose at some point we'll put up with anything to get the deal we want. So you probably knew what you wanted, what brand of sunglasses, and you knew what the price was and how much cheaper they were. So I guess that there comes a point where we cut through all of the design and the flim flam to get what we want.
Yeah, I mean, when it's 30% cheaper, it makes you're willing to put up with it, aren't you? I mean, it only takes like probably an extra minute to actually find what I need.
It's interesting. That's very true. I think there's a great example I saw of what we were willing to put up with to save money. There was a Which study about airlines, and it was focusing on Ryanair, who are, I think, the ultimate. We'll put up with a lot for a cheap fare. So there was a study which showed them to be the least popular, most complained about airline in Europe. But right alongside it was a table showing them that they were the airline that most people flew on in Europe. Which is exactly that. We're willing to put up with an awful lot because we can get a flight for 20 quid or whatever it is with them.
You say that, but I think there are a lot of routes where, Ryanair are almost your only option. Or if you have to fly from a certain airport, quite often they're the only, there might be two. I think they're the other one's Wizz Air, but they're also, I think they're either partnered with or owned by Ryanair. I'm not sure. There's something that influences that data, which is kind of outside of people's control. If they have to use their airline, it'd be the same with trains, wouldn't it? This might be the most complained about train line, but it's also the most popular on this route because it happens to run 90% of the trains on that route.
Yeah. Yes, I suppose. Yeah.
But yeah, if it was that big a deal, people would pick a different destination or fly a slightly different route. But if it saves you a lot of money using Ryanair, you put up with it, don't you? And
also, most of the complaints were about things that Ryanair just do. We were complaining they didn't get a drink on board. Well, Ryanair don't offer drinks on board, or complaining that there were no pre-allocated seats. Well, Ryanair don't give you a pre-allocated seat. So a lot of them were just complaining about Ryanair's perfectly well-established working practices.
Yeah,
what it proves is we're a nation of complainers.
Yeah, possibly, probably. I think it's people complaining about stuff that it's just their policy. It's not a mistake or a problem that's happened.
I want to complain, or I'm willing to buy this from you, but I want to have a complaint on the way about the way you do it.
Yeah, I mean we all do. I mean, I don't want to dwell on this too long, but the whole priority boarding thing and the fact that priority boarding used to get you on the plane first, but now it's the only way to get hand luggage on.
Oh, is that right? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, you can take a very small piece of hand luggage on with you with a normal seat, but if you want an actual small suitcase, you have to pay for priority to get that on now. because the non-priority year bag you're allowed to bring on is too small. It's like a small backpack, like a day bag sort of thing. So you have to pay that extra.
Interesting. They never stop looking for ways to squeeze a little bit more money out of us.
Yeah. Well, they know it works, but also it means that the priority queue is always much longer now. And so that has caused complaints because people are saying, well, it's not really priority anymore because you're pretty much forcing everyone to use it. Your choices are use priority to get your bag on and take it on the plane with you, or pay to have it checked in the hold.
Yeah, there's full of, so without dwelling on it too long, there's also the problems I've seen firsthand where you get taken to the plane on buses and they just fill a bus up and so all the priority people get on the bus first. But if the bus not full, then they'll put a bunch of other people on with them. So
yeah,
you've got to, so there's all sorts of holes. Anyway.
Yeah. So moving on a little bit, if someone is getting started, let's say you're getting started with a new business, launching a new SaaS business, for example, what are some key things you think they need to consider right at the start? In that early stage process, almost before they even go to market, really.
I think even before they even think of going to market, even before they go to their computer and write a line of code, there's some good ingredients every great successful business has. So the first one we've discussed already, you have to be solving a problem, and it has to be a pretty urgent problem. So there are some problems which we might, we want to have solved, but it's not urgent today, but it might become urgent in 5 years' time, in which case you're 5 years too early. So mobile payments is a great example of that. That came out 10 years ago, and it was probably 3 or 4 years too early because even today, it still to an extent competes with, certainly in the UK, competes with debit cards and credit cards. And first, absolutely the first thing, are you solving an urgent problem for people? And then the second question I would ask is, if I am solving an urgent problem, why would somebody come to me to have it solved as opposed to anybody else? In other words, what have I got that is unique? How am I differentiated in a way that's going to give me an unfair advantage? And I think those are the two critical things. But if you can't get past those two questions, then you have to seriously ask yourself, is it wise to continue without having a rethink? And then if you're happy about that, I think that you need to understand there's a big market for what you got. So it's no point solving an urgent problem for one person. You need to be, especially if you're going to go and talk to investors, they'll want to see a large addressable market, a huge addressable market. And then the final thing I would think about at this stage before I did anything was just have a rough idea in my head, what are the unit economics of my, especially in SaaS, what's it going to cost me to acquire my customers and how long am I going to keep them, all that sort of stuff. So does it financially make sense? Can I run this business and make profit out of it? And I wouldn't get into really deep detail at that stage on the unit economics. I just want to understand the headlines to make sure that it looks sensible. So those four things. Am I solving a problem? Why would somebody come to me to solve the problem? Is there a big market for this? And can I do this in a financially sustainable way? And I think I wouldn't step anywhere near any product development or any sort of working up a product until I was happy I had those. And sometimes you can take 6 months to think those things through. If you're doing it properly, you need to go and talk to people, maybe go and talk to some investors, talk to some potential customers, do some of your own research. But it's that groundwork is never wasted. Either never wasted because you realise that the business is not viable and so you save a lot of money, or it helps you think things through properly so you get off to a good start.
Yeah, I think on the cost side, you can get estimates for advertising and things and get a rough idea. But I think what I've seen missing is actually looking at how much, and it sounds so simple, but looking at how much the product or service costs to just provide to the customer. So one thing I was trying to dig out of someone the other day was if you gave this service away for free, how much would it cost you on a monthly basis to just provide the service to them?
Yeah.
Because I see that get overlooked quite a few times. And actually they just look at how much can they spend to acquire a customer? And that might be, £50. And how long do they think they're going to keep that customer? It might be 18 months. And let's say that's £250. And then they kind of look at that and go, okay, we're going to make £200 for every customer we bring on. And they kind of seem to ignore every other cost.
I guess there's a couple of things I'd say. One is that the first business I started, which was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, just to put our tech together cost us about, and just to put a simple data center together cost us about 50 grand. And that was in the days when you had to have your own, the concept of cloud and switching things on and off in the cloud didn't exist. And so you paid much more attention to that kind of thing because it was a real cost. Providing service was a real cost to you. And so, but today, you could probably put that 50 grand data center together today in the cloud for next to nothing. I mean, really next to nothing, on a pay-as-you-use basis, so that you're using it, so you're only paying when it's actually switched on. And so I think people, you're absolutely right with what you say, but I think people pay less attention to that, the sort of direct cost of running the business, because they think they're trivial. And you're right, they're not. I mean, I think if you've got 50,000 customers, it's not a trivial exercise to put together the tech to keep them happy and all the redundancy and the resilience and that you need to do that properly. So I think it's a good point.
Yeah. So this is probably, I mean, you've obviously kind of touched on this, but looking at the opposite side, what are the biggest or most common mistakes you see when, I guess, not so much when people haven't thought about it, but when people actually do approach their brand proposition and do try to think about it, what are the big and common mistakes you see?
I think we've touched on one earlier on, so I won't go over it again, which is they want to talk about themselves. I think the other really big mistake I see is people overcomplicate their proposition because they understand it. So the way you think about it is you forget what it's like to be the beginner. So you forget what it's like when you were first learning about this, how these acronyms and this jargon wasn't at all familiar to you, and you had to ask somebody what it meant. So you learn all that and you spend 2 years immersed in it, and then you talk in that language and you assume, it's kind of like it's the curse of knowledge. You assume that other people know what you know. And so you see these very tortuous propositions full of acronyms and jargon. It's just simple things like cloud. A lot of people don't really understand what cloud means, but people who work in that world just take it for granted. That's a word everyone understands. And so I think that overcomplicating, and the problem is if you make your prospect work too hard to understand your proposition, they won't bother. They'll just scroll on to the next one. So a big mistake I see is people just assuming everyone knows what they know, and so they clutter up their propositions with heavy jargon-filled tech language.
Yeah, I think I'm sure I've been guilty of this at times as well. Either pitching to prospects as a consultant. I've mentioned CTRs, CPAs, LTV, AOV, and a lot of people do know these, but occasionally I'll get a business owner who doesn't know one or two of these because they're not a marketer, and I've just gone in almost with the assumption that they would know these. And I know, some people use slightly different acronyms for things, but it's also happened, in companies I've worked in as well when I've been speaking to other teams, and I will speak kind of as the marketer and use all those terms. I'm talking to a developer who's just never come across them, because why would they?
No, it's a good point. I think that your point about the business owners not understanding it, I think that's important, because quite often what someone will say to me, I'll say, look, there's too much jargon in here, and they'll say, well, we're aiming this at a CTO. He'll understand what that means. And that's true, but my point to them would be, well, what about all the other people who might see it, who might want to send it to the CTO? So the business owner thinks, hey, this is interesting for us. My CTO needs to look at this. And you lose those people if you've got too much impenetrable jargon in your proposition. You're only then relying on the CTO seeing it and understanding it.
Yeah. So actually, if you pitch it, because I've had times when I've pitched to kind of the owner, or CEO or something like that, but it's actually the CTO or chief marketing officer who has basically signed off the project, because they're the one involved in that area of the business. So really it is their decision. They're the ones who know. But if you get the initial pitch wrong, with some of those acronyms and terminology and stuff, it never even gets past the CEO or the managing director or whoever, because they look at it and go, don't understand this, not sure I see the point of it. And it never gets to the person who's actually the person to say, yeah, I think we do need this, let's sign it off.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think there are going to be any big trends in kind of brands looking at their positioning and in the next sort of 12 to 18 months?
I think there's a trend which has kind of been bubbling under for a while, which I think is probably beginning to get some real traction, which is what I would describe as the personal brand. So what we've been used to historically is big companies building their brand. So, big guys, Amazon, Apple, IBM, those sort of people building a brand for the corporation. And it was quite rare think back into if I asked you who founded Cisco or who founded IBM, a lot of people wouldn't be able to tell you. But if I asked you who founded lastminute.com or Facebook or Twitter or any of those, we'd all know, because it's become the personality at the front of the business become more important. And also, I think if you go back 30, 40 years, people like IBM, you've got a job for life. And so you as a person, as a worker, you would attach yourself to a corporation. You'd be an IBM man, or you'd be whatever it was, an Apple man. Whereas I think now there's a lot more people working in the gig economy or working as solopreneurs or working in twos and threes, where actually they regard themselves as the business asset. So it's like me PLC, and I decide which of those brands I'm going to attach myself to for the length of time it suits me. And so what we're doing is we're building personal brands. So you see a lot more people with personal websites, a lot more people's companies named after them, a lot more people working for themselves, pushing themselves rather than a brand. And so the whole personal branding thing, I think, is becoming quite big. And so I've seen a couple of examples where I've helped people not to build their company brand, but to build their personal brand. And it's not that much different, but there's a lot more storytelling, and the backstory is really, really important. But I think we'll see more of that and I think to an extent, I think that the lockdown has probably accelerated that, because a lot more people have either decided they want to work for themselves or been forced to work for themselves or have the opportunity to do something they've been meaning to do for themselves. I've seen quite a lot of that. So the whole personal brand thing, I think, is a big trend that's beginning to really catch on.
Yeah, I think it's been more prevalent in the B2C world. You've got companies more like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Twitter, Facebook. I think most people would be able to name the founders, but on the B2B side, or maybe it's just me, but on B2B side, I would struggle a lot more. So Cisco, IBM, no idea. And then, in the kind of fashion industry, cosmetics and all that, you get a lot of companies which have a celebrity as either the founder or the kind of face of it. But even a lot of smaller ones, they would generally, if they are providing, manufacturing their own products, you do get a lot of the time they do explain who the designer is, and it's normally the founder of the business as well, and there is that bit of the focus on them. But yeah, I do agree. There's a lot more, even just people who've been in a career, they're in jobs their entire career, still have that kind of personal website, personal brand, and they kind of market themselves a bit outside of their company. I think that. Yeah, I think you're right. That'll pick up a bit more.
I think it's not so much. I mean, being able to name who started Amazon and who started Apple, I think that's just an illustration of the early stages of personal branding. I think the idea, I'd imagine back in the 50s, the idea of promoting a person above the brand was probably anathema to them. So it's a relatively recent thing that these leaders of these businesses have become celebrities. I would say Bill Gates probably one of the first people to achieve that kind of status. But now it's commonplace. you think about the top 4 or 5 biggest companies in the world: Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft. We all know who the chief executive of them is. So that's just an illustration of the rise of it. I think where it's going to really start to take off is individuals now beginning to think of themselves as their own business entity. And so my website is peterwhent.com, and I promote myself as a person. So I don't promote myself under the name of a company or under the name of a service. I promote myself, and I think there's a lot of that going on, and I'm seeing a lot more of it in the market.
Yeah, well, I think I wonder if it's linked to the whole kind of consumers don't want to be seen as just a customer. They kind of want that more intimate relationship with brands. And maybe similarly, employees don't want to be just an employee number. They want to be, that they want to be known for the work they are doing at that company a bit more, build up their brand. I guess make it clear that it's not this brands that came up with this great campaign or whatever. It was this person behind it. Someone had to come up with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we also probably have an opportunity to work like that as individuals for ourselves on our own terms, much more, or to a much larger extent than we did even 20 or 30 years ago. So you can now work for yourself, and it doesn't matter where you work, or to an extent, it doesn't matter what hours you work, because all the tools are there now to be able to do it for yourself. And so if you're going to promote yourself like that, you need a personal brand to make it work. So I think the opportunities we've got are wildly different to the opportunities we had 30 years ago. I saw an advert last week, which is kind of a really good example of this. An advert last week saying if you're locked down and you're working remotely, this is an advert by the government of Barbados. If you're locked down and working remotely, come and work in Barbados. We'll give you a 1-year visa to work here, working remotely. In other words, you're not going to go and take a job of theirs. You'll do your own job, but it doesn't matter where in the world you do it. Come and do it on the beach in Barbados. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And that's you just couldn't have done that 20 or 30 years ago. You didn't have the tools to be able to work like that.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, this sounds great, isn't it? Doesn't it? I love Barbados.
Yeah, you can imagine that a year there.
I'm not sure what it's like all year round. I've definitely been there for the nice weather. I've not been there during hurricane season, fortunately.
No, but I suppose just if you think about if that's the way you work, if you're the sort of person who works from home or from you choose where you work. You work from an internet cafe or a WeWork or at home, or you go on holiday and you still work. If that's the way you work and you build a business like that, then it would make sense that you want to promote yourself as opposed to a corporation. Because what those freelancers will do is they'll either work plurally, so they'll have 3 or 4 projects going on at once for various people, or they'll do 3 months here, 2 months there, a month there. But however they do it, it's them they're promoting, not a corporation. So they're building their own personal brand, and that's, I think, why there's more of that going on at the moment because of circumstances. And that's why I think I've seen more people reaching out saying, I'm trying to build my brand, my personal brand. How do I do it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do you have any personally? Do you have any pet peeves when it comes to marketing?
Yes, I do. I have. I think, like most people, I think top of the list of my pet peeves is people, and I'm sure everyone will have seen this and to some degree will resonate. People who put shouty adverts on Facebook promising you something that you just know is impossible. They'll say, use my magic 30-step formula and you'll have a 6-figure pipeline in a month's time. And you just know that's not possible. And what they're doing is they're preying on the fears and insecurities of people who've got businesses that aren't going quite as they want. And they'll grab onto any lifeline. And if they see this convincing looking advert, and it just pains me that people make a living like that, because I think it's verging on, it's certainly immoral. It's verging on crooked.
It's those, I've seen them on Facebook. They pop up. They seem to pop up in phases every few months or maybe at certain times. I'm surprised I haven't seen them during these last 3-4 months actually. But it's people who have, it'd be a picture of them on an island, or somewhere nice on a beach or whatever, and it'll be
driving a Mercedes or a Harley Davidson.
Yeah, really nice car or something, and it'll be their life story in the advert. But it's always, I had a job, I lost the job, got into drugs, went to jail, came out of jail, and then goes on a bit. But it's basically turned their life around. Now they're doing millions, and they want to share their secrets with you for $99.
Exactly.
It's that same formula, but it does sound so good that some people are kind of suckered into that, and they probably make they probably make enough money to pay for those ads and maybe a bit of a lifestyle, but they're not. These people are not millionaires.
The question I want to ask them is: if you've got this formula which can build a 6-figure funnel in a month, then why don't you invest your time in building yourself a six-figure funnel and make yourself rich, rather than? And the answer to that is because they can't. And so when you come to do it, I've never done one. Maybe one day I should do one and just see what's in them. But I suspect what you get in there is someone just says, here's the formula, and you're left to get on with it. And of course it won't work because they'll tell you there's some reason why you haven't done it properly or you haven't followed the steps. But you just know, back to the bigger point, you just know when you read those adverts that they are snake oil salesmen who are not going to deliver. It makes me cross, because I think they are, unfortunately, there are enough people out there who have tried to build a business. They're not, and usually they're kind of one-man bands and coaches and solopreneurs who can't seem to make it work, and they are vulnerable to that kind of approach. They'll try anything, and they'll believe it because they want to believe it, and they'll invest the 90 quid and it won't work.
Yeah.
And, so that's my pet peeve.
Okay. And hopefully we can get this to a different one, but if you could kill off a particular marketing channel or tactic, what would it be?
Let's assume we've already killed off that one.
Yeah.
I think the one I would kill off is the one where people just flood your direct messages on LinkedIn with spam. And for two reasons. One, because it's just irritating, although it's not that irritating, you can ignore it. But it just doesn't work. It does not work. People buy from people that they're engaged with, and there's the old phrase, people they know, like, and trust. And actually, all three of those are true. But so I'll give an example. I did a launch of my online course recently, and I launched it to two audiences. One was my LinkedIn audience, which is I've got a fairly engaged audience on LinkedIn. And I've also built up an email list primarily through Facebook ads, but nicely put, ethical, valuable Facebook ads, not charlatan ones. And I've got an audience, but it's not, because it's a relatively new audience, they're not quite so engaged. And almost all the sales I made, almost all the people that signed up for my course came from my engaged LinkedIn audience. And so that tells you what you need to know. You people want to get to know you, they want to understand you, they want to see your content, or however they get to know you, and they come to like it, and they come to trust you, and they become to regard you as a valuable provider of insight. And it's at that point that you can wave some kind of offer in front of them saying, would you like to do business? And they may or they may not, but they're much more likely to. But if you hit somebody cold who you've never heard of in your life, and they've never heard of you, with a direct message on LinkedIn saying, and they always start with a sort of, I just thought you'd like to know kind of approach, which is, I don't know how you're supposed to start them. I don't know how you do them, but they're just a waste of time. I don't think I've ever even really properly engaged with somebody who's hit me with a direct message on LinkedIn, let alone bought anything from them.
So would you apply that to just cold selling? Or
yeah, I would. I would. I'm for slightly different reasons. I'm not a fan of cold calling. I think cold calling is dead. And I speak as someone who was, for a lot of my life, a salesman, and cold calling was my way to target. I was an absolute fully signed up member of the cold calling club, but I'm not now, and I think it's dead. And I think it's dead because it's such an inefficient way to get to your customers. You have to do so much legwork to find what. So let me just caveat it and say that In the hands of an expert, I think cold calling can work. You can still get in front of the right people. But the problem is there aren't very many experts at cold calling. There are people who just, make lots of phone calls, and that's a completely different thing. But, I think there's definitely a place for the telephone in the sales process, but you've got to engage the phone at the right point. And I think that you can cover so much more ground, so much more efficiently using great content, which will then provide you with a warm audience of people who will be receptive to a phone call. So I think cold calling. So yes, the answer to your question is most of those cold methods are dead. I think just buying an email list and hitting it, complete waste of time. I think cold calling, terribly inefficient, and I wouldn't do it in my business. Cold DMs, complete waste of time. So yeah.
Like you said, I think there are the people who are really good at it and can make it work. And that probably does apply to email, call, and LinkedIn, or maybe even Facebook and other channels. But yeah, for the majority of people, it's just a case of mass doing it and hoping that something sticks. And yeah, it is, like you say, it's inefficient. It takes up a lot of time. You don't get much return from it. So yeah, fair enough.
I think that idea that if we throw enough of it out there, something will stick, I think that's slightly flawed thinking, because really when it gets out there, they're all one-on-one conversations. Every email is going to a person, and everyone, human nature is the same in every case. We feel invaded. We don't know this person. So I think that there are people who make the numbers game work. If you think about some of these people who do mail order, someone like Bowden, but they know their audience really well. They'll have a database full of information about us and full of data points, and that's a different type of marketing. That's not cold. So I think cold is the common theme of things I don't like, partially because I just know how inefficient they are, and I think the people who are trying them are somehow convincing themselves that they'll be different, and I think they rarely, if ever, are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been really great stuff. Really, really interesting. How can people get in touch, find out more from you?
They can. My website is peterwhent.com. Well, Whent has got an H in it, or so that there's a contact form on there. Or I'm on LinkedIn. Very happy to have a direct message chat on LinkedIn. And my email address is peter@peterwhent.com. Feel free just to hit me directly with an email.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Will. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Positioning is all about translating the value proposition of your product or service into something your customers understand. It's so important because your chance to grab someone's attention is limited to just a few seconds or one or two interactions. And if you're not clear with what you do, they'll move on, possibly to a competitor. It's so easy to start a business these days. You've got people selling products before they've even made them and they're available. You've got entrepreneurs taking on millions in funding to get their ideas built. And you've got thousands of people in between. So if you get your positioning right and your value proposition aligned with what your customers need, you'll be fine. You'll stand out above the competition. Hopefully better than fine as well. Hopefully you'll do really well. Feel free to reach out to Peter on LinkedIn. He's always up for a chat. And as usual, any questions or requests for the podcast, just reach out to myself at will@customerswhoclick.com. Next week, I've got Matt Ryback from Socket Labs, who will talk to us about transactional email and how brands can get the most value out of them. But until then, keep those customers clicking.